We are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for this one race logs, breeding histories, veterinary records, to piece together the story of a Japanese racehorse named Marvelous Sunday.
Such an incredible story.
It really is. We are looking at an animal who defied every logical rule of equine physiology. A late-blooming underdog who possessed a frankly terrifying amount of speed, a body made of glass, and a pretty bizarre set of pre-race rituals.
Yeah, the rituals are wild. But to understand the sheer improbability of Marvelous Sunday's rise, we first have to look at the genetic shadow he was born into back in 1992.
Right, the pedigree.
Yeah, he was part of the very first crop of foals sired by a stallion named Sunday Silence. Oh, totally off the charts.
But the sources paint a very different picture of Marvelous Sunday as a young horse. He was scrawny.
Yeah, very scrawny.
He had this thin, unimpressive frame that looked absolutely nothing like the muscular powerhouses that buyers were looking for. I mean, nobody wanted him.
He was essentially a leftover. In the high-stakes world of thoroughbred sales, a physically underwhelming foal is usually just, dismissed immediately, regardless of their pedigree.
Right. The genes don't matter if the body doesn't look the part.
Exactly. And he was only taken in because of a pre-existing relationship. A trainer named Makoto Osawa basically called in a favor and arranged for him to be owned by Sadao Sasahara.
And that was purely because Sasahara already owned a successful horse named Marvelous Crown, right?
Yep, that's the only reason. There was no intense bidding war. There was just a quiet little favor to keep this frail-looking horse in the system.
I want to pause on that frailty for a second, because this is where the physics of the story start to get really fascinating. He finally begins training, and by August of his 2-year-old season, something terrifying happens.
Terrifying is definitely the right word for it.
He starts running, and he isn't just fast. The sources say he is effortlessly blowing past older, seasoned horses in these workouts.
Which shouldn't happen.
Right. It's a classic underdog moment, but the mechanics of it are incredibly dangerous because his body couldn't handle the power.
Right. Exactly. His cardiovascular system and his neuromuscular firing rate had developed this elite explosive acceleration, but his bone density and his skeletal structure were still catching up.
Yet, that raw speed is enough to catch the attention of Japanese racing royalty. Trainer Kunihiko Take sees this scrawny horse run and immediately requests his son to be the jockey. Huge, because his son is Yutaka Take, a man who would go on to become an absolute legend in the sport.
Right, and that tells us everything we need to know about what was happening in those workouts. They have their pick of the most biomechanically perfect animals in the entire country. So for Yutaka Take to commit to a horse with such a frail frame, I mean, the sheer unadulterated power Marvelous Sunday was producing must have been staggering to witness.
But the Ferrari engine metaphor catches up to them before he even makes his official debut. Disaster strikes.
He fractures his right knee.
And the sources mention that his condition deteriorated so rapidly during this first recovery that he nearly died. He is isolated, completely immobile, and in immense pain.
And his debut gets heavily delayed.
Right. But he survives. He finally hits the track at 3 years old, Yutaka Take is in the saddle, and the Ferrari engine is remarkably still there. He immediately wins his first 2 races.
He completely proves the Takes were right to wait for him. The acceleration is entirely real.
But the chassis is still a golf cart. The cycle repeats. He suffers another knee fracture.
Just devastating.
He goes through that excruciating near-fatal recovery process all over again. He finally returns and suffers a 3rd fracture. This time is his left hind leg.
It's just relentless. The trainers and the jockeys kept him in the sport because every single time they put a saddle on him, he displayed this desperate, undeniable desire to compete. He retained the psychological will of a predator, even though he had the skeletal fragility of prey.
So we have an animal that biologically should be terrified of running, yet he returns to the track at age 4. What happens when that psychological will meets a body that has already shattered 3 times?
Well, he shakes off the rust with a modest 4th-place finish in his comeback race. And then he just ignites.
He goes on a 6-race winning streak. The sources track this incredible ascent. 4 of those wins are graded stakes victories. He is blowing through the proving grounds and rocketing straight into the elite G1 ranks, the absolute pinnacle of the sport.
The late-blooming, fragile underdog has finally arrived.
But he arrives at the absolute worst possible moment in racing history. He doesn't step into some weak transitional division. He steps into a historical arms race.
Yeah, the competition was just brutal that year.
The sources refer to this era as the 1997 Older Horse Trio. He is standing alongside two absolute titans. You have Sakura Laurel, who was known for immense stamina, and Mayano Top Gun, who was just a tactical genius on the track.
And this represents a massive shift in the narrative. Because Marvelous Sunday is no longer just fighting his own body, he is fighting the absolute genetic limit of the thoroughbred breed.
The best of the best.
Exactly. These three horses were pushing each other to speeds and tactical extremes that had rarely been seen before.
And it's not a fairy tale, right, where the underdog shows up and immediately vanquishes the titans. The reality of a historical arms race is brutal.
Very brutal.
At the highly anticipated Tenno-Sho Autumn Race, the stage is totally set for the three dominant horses to finally clash. But they are all caught completely off guard by a young horse named Bubblegum Fellow, who just steals the victory.
Yeah.
Marvelous Sunday finishes fourth.
Yeah, a complete spoiler to the narrative the fans desperately wanted.
Then, at the year-end Grand Prix, the Arima Kinen, Marvelous Sunday runs a brilliant, exhausting race, but crosses the line second, just behind Sakura Laurel. He is elite, but he is trapped in this frustrating cycle of heartbreaking near misses.
He is. Yet it was during these very defeats that his legacy truly began to cement itself with the public. Fans weren't just drawn to him out of pity for his injuries. They were captivated by a highly unique personality that was really starting to manifest on the track.
I am so glad we are getting to this, because his racing quirks are honestly the most fascinating part of the data. He had this bizarre habit. The second he reached the front of the pack, the very moment he passed the lead horse, he would just ease up, he would stop pushing.
Which, for a jockey, is a tactical nightmare. I mean, the mechanics of thoroughbred racing require a horse to accelerate through the finish line. Races are decided by fractions of a second.
Right, you can't just coast.
No. If a 1,000-pound animal traveling at 40 miles an hour decides to just take a breather 50 yards from the wire because he thinks the job is done, you lose.
But looking at the psychology we discussed earlier, does this point to a difference between competitive drive and performance drive? It seems like Marvelous Sunday didn't care about running fast just for the sake of running fast.
He didn't care about the clock at all.
Right. He solely cared about beating the horse next to him. Once he was in front, his brain just said, point proven, let's go home.
That distinction is brilliant and totally accurate. He possessed a hyper-competitive drive, but absolutely zero performance drive. And Yutaka Take realized you cannot train that out of an adult horse.
So what did he do?
He engineered a strategy entirely around the horse's psychology. Take had to physically hold Marvelous Sunday back in the slipstream of the other horses, essentially masking the finish line from him.
How do you even do that? How do you hold back 1,000 pounds of muscle that actively wants to sprint?
It requires immense upper body strength from the jockey, really heavy pressure on the bit, and a terrifying amount of patience. Take would wait until the absolute last possible fraction of a second. He would only let Marvelous Sunday overtake the leader exactly as their noses crossed the finish line. Because if he moved even a second too early, the horse would stop and they'd get past.
The margin for error is effectively zero. It is a high-wire act at 40 miles an hour. And that wasn't his only eccentricity. The sources document a very memorable off-track ritual, too.
Oh, yes.
Before every single race, without fail, Marvelous Sunday would urinate.
A bizarre but highly consistent detail.
Was it nerves? Was he trying to lighten his body weight? Whatever the biological reason, the fans just adored it. In a sport that can often feel very sterile and elite, this weird little habit gave him a grounded, almost relatable character.
It totally humanized him, and the public's affection for that character was tested heavily during his 5-year-old season. At the Sankei Osaka High, the high-wire slipstream act is working perfectly. He is surging toward the finish line, looking absolutely set for a clear victory.
But suddenly, spectators throw paper debris onto the track.
Which is catastrophic. A horse's eyes are positioned on the sides of their head, meaning they are highly reactive to sudden movements in their peripheral vision.
Right, they spook so easily.
Startled by the fluttering paper, Marvelous Sunday violently veers off his racing line at top speed.
That's incredibly dangerous.
The kinetic physics of a sudden horizontal shift at 40 miles an hour usually results in snapped tendons or just a horrific fall. But miraculously, he manages to stabilize his massive frame, regains his stride, and still crosses the wire to win the race.
But the danger of that moment wasn't lost on anyone. Yutaka Take was furious. He publicly called out the crowd's behavior, which, is a really rare breach of the usually stoic jockey-media relationship. It just highlights the razor-thin edge this horse was constantly walking.
It really does, and the hurdles just didn't stop there. He enters the Tenno Show spring race looking for redemption. It's another grueling, stamina-draining battle against the legendary trio, but again, he falls just short, finishing third behind Mayano Top Gun.
He's constantly knocking on the door, but he can't seem to kick it open. You really start to wonder if he is just destined to be the nearly horse of his generation. The tragic, fragile fan favorite who could never quite capture the ultimate crown.
But the narrative finally shatters at the 1997 Takarazuka Kinen.
The big breakthrough.
Yes. Sakura Laurel and Mayano Top Gun are both absent from this race due to their own physical limits. But the public hasn't lost faith. The fans actually vote Marvelous Sunday as the overwhelming #1 favorite to win.
And he delivers. He finally gets his revenge on the younger horse, Bubblegum Fellow. Yutaka Take executes the slipstream strategy flawlessly, holding him back and striking at the perfect millisecond. Marvelous Sunday captures his long-awaited, deeply deserved G1 victory.
It is the culmination of years of agony, from the scrawny beginnings, through 3 fractured legs, near-fatal recoveries, and the heartbreak of constantly finishing second and third to generational titans. He had finally climbed to the absolute peak of the mountain.
But achieving that pinnacle demanded the exact same currency everything else in his life had demanded. The physical toll comes due almost immediately.
It always did with him. Following his G1 victory, the veterinary reality of his glass cannon physique reasserts itself. Another severe injury is discovered in his legs.
So he is forced off the track once again. He manages to endure one final grueling recovery to return for the Arima Kinen, where he puts in a really valiant effort but finishes second to a 3-year-old named Silk Justice. And then the final blow lands.
A serious tendon issue. And unlike a bone fracture, a severely damaged tendon in a racehorse destroys the elasticity required for explosive speed.
There's no coming back from that.
No, there's no surgical miracle for a blown tendon. The decision is finally made. Marvelous Sunday is retired.
But when you look at the entirety of his career log in our sources, there is one statistic that just completely defies all logic. He had 15 career starts. He secured 10 wins. But despite the catastrophic bone fractures, despite the massive gaps in his training, despite running in a historical arms race against the toughest horses of the decade, he never finished worse than 4th.
It's mathematically absurd. In the chaos of thoroughbred racing, horses get boxed in by traffic. They have bad days. They struggle with wet dirt or heavy turf. To maintain a record of never worse than 4th requires a level of consistency that is practically unheard of for a completely healthy animal.
Let alone a fragile one.
Right. For a horse battling chronic physical breakdowns, it is just unbelievable.
I really want you to absorb the weight of that. A record of never dropping below 4th place with multiple broken legs in between races is, I think, a greater testament to athletic greatness than a pristine, undefeated streak by someone who never faced a headwind in their life.
Absolutely. And his post-racing career perfectly mirrored his on-track identity, too. He was retired to stud and was active until 2014. While he didn't produce the lightning-fast G1 flat race winners breeders might have initially hoped for, he found immense success siring jump horses.
Which requires rugged endurance, massive stamina, and the ability to take a hit and keep going.
Exactly. He passed those traits down beautifully, continuing the Sunday Silence bloodline until his death in 2016 at the age of 24. But looking at the entirety of the source material, I really want to leave you with a counterintuitive theory to consider.
Now let's hear it.
Well, we view his injuries as the tragic obstacles that kept him from achieving even more, right?
Yeah, of course.
But what if his fragility was actually the secret to his consistency? Because he spent so much time in recovery, his body was never allowed to fall into a dull, repetitive racing rhythm.
Oh, that's interesting.
Every time he stepped onto the track, it had been months since his last race. Did every single start become a concentrated, desperate burst of sheer willpower that he simply wouldn't have possessed if he had been healthy his whole life?
So the breaks fueled him.
Yeah. Did the constant threat of his own fragility actually preserve the ferocious fire of his competitive drive?
Did the pain create the greatness? That is an incredible lens to view his legacy through.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.